When people talk about the world of Jesus, most imagine something almost ethereal, a landscape shaped by spirituality, moral teachings, parables about love and compassion, and miracles seemingly detached from material reality, as if history unfolded in a vacuum free from hunger, debt, and survival. But this comforting image hides an uncomfortable truth, because first-century Judea was not merely a religious stage, it was a territory crushed by a brutal system of economic exploitation, carefully designed to extract wealth from a poor population and transfer it to a local elite aligned with Rome and ultimately to the empire itself. Life there did not revolve around faith alone, it revolved around debt, land, taxation, and the constant fear of losing everything because of a bad harvest, an unexpected drought, or a tax that simply could not be paid, and within this reality, any spiritual message automatically carried an economic and political meaning, deeply subversive even when wrapped in simple words accessible to the poor. This is not a script about religion in the traditional sense, but about power, money, and control, about how empires truly function, how sacred institutions can become engines of oppression, and how a seemingly moral message can conceal one of the most dangerous economic revolutions in history, a revolution that did not rely on swords but on ideas, that did not raise armies but questioned the legitimacy of an entire system. Prepare yourself to look at the story of Jesus from a rarely explored angle, an uncomfortable and material perspective where the real conflict was not only between faith and sin, but between debt and freedom, between exploitation and survival, between an empire that needed to extract wealth and a people who had nothing left to lose, and by the end you may wonder whether the great narratives that shaped the world still hide similar structures today. Judea was not an ordinary province of the Roman Empire. It was not integrated to be developed or strengthened, but assigned a very specific role within imperial logic, that of an exploitation colony, a territory whose sole purpose was to generate surplus and send it to the center of power with little concern for local survival. Most people lived in rural areas, working small plots of land inherited across generations, fields that barely produced enough to feed a family throughout the year, leaving no margin for error, no reserves, no protection against natural disasters or political shifts. And yet on this fragile base rested a heavy and relentless tax system made up of land taxes, production taxes, trade taxes, and even head taxes charged simply for existing under Roman rule. These taxes were not adjusted to local reality. It did not matter whether the harvest was good or bad, whether pests or drought destroyed the crops. The amount was fixed and had to be paid regardless, pushing thousands of small farmers into a predictable trap debt. With no access to fair credit, no modern banking, and no real legal protection, people borrowed at high interest rates, often using their own land as collateral, and a single bad year was enough to begin an irreversible cycle where debt grew faster than the ability to repay it, leading to the loss of property, the transformation of former owners into tenants on their own land, and often into precarious laborers on large estates controlled by elites aligned with Rome. Over time, this process concentrated land in very few hands, creating large estates and a growing mass of landless people with no security and no future, while the local elite grew richer by acting as intermediaries between Rome and the population, guaranteeing tax collection and political stability in exchange for privilege, protection, and power. This was not just poverty, it was a system designed to reproduce poverty, to keep the majority permanently vulnerable, where resistance seemed futile because the problem was not individual but structural, and the harder people worked, the deeper they fell into debt while wealth continuously flowed out of the region. This was the material ground of Judea, a place where injustice did not need explanation. It was felt in empty stomachs and constant anxiety, and within this reality, any promise of forgiveness, liberation, or justice carried explosive weight. The Temple of Jerusalem is often remembered as the spiritual heart of the Jewish people, a place of prayer and divine connection. But in the first century, it also functioned as one of the most powerful economic institutions in the region. A financial hub that controlled money flows, validated transactions, and reinforced the existing system of exploitation. Every adult Jew was required to pay the temple tax, an annual fee that was neither symbolic nor optional, and could only be paid using a specific currency, the Tyrian shekel, known for its high silver content, which immediately created a problem because most people did not use this coin in daily life, and were forced to exchange their money through money changers authorized by the temple itself. These exchanges were not free, they involved fees and margins that enriched those who controlled the system, and because the tax was mandatory, currency exchange became unavoidable, turning faith into a controlled financial transaction. In addition, sacrifices required by religious law could only be performed using animals deemed pure and approved, sold within or near the temple complex at prices set by the priestly elite, meaning that access to the sacred itself carried a fixed cost, and being poor did not mean exemption, only smaller offerings that still had to be paid. Crucially, religious taxes did not replace Roman taxes. They were added on top of them, creating double economic pressure on an already suffocating population, and the temple, far from resisting Rome, was deeply aligned with imperial power because its leadership depended on Roman approval to maintain authority, privilege, and stability. High priests were not chosen by the people but through political agreements, and their primary function was to preserve order, prevent rebellion, and keep wealth flowing without disruption, placing them in a position where spiritual language masked material oppression. This contradiction did not go unnoticed, and resentment toward the temple was not rejection of faith but rejection of a sacred institution captured by an exploitative logic, where religion legitimized suffering instead of relieving it. Charity existed but was insufficient. It treated symptoms rather than causes. It did not return land, cancel debts, or dismantle the system producing poverty. While the sense grew that God himself had been turned into an instrument of collection, it is within this environment that Jesus appears, and when his words are examined closely, they reveal a deeply economic language filled with references to debts, wages, landowners, laborers, creditors, harvests, and power relations. When he spoke of forgiveness, the term carried the meaning of debt cancellation, something his audience understood instantly because they lived trapped in a system where debt never ended and second chances did not exist. When he spoke of the poor, he spoke of the people standing before him carrying exploitation in their bodies, and when he spoke of the kingdom of God, he did not describe only an afterlife but proposed an alternative order where the rules were different and accumulation and oppression were not final truths. This message was profoundly subversive because it did not directly attack Rome or call for armed revolt, but undermined the moral legitimacy of the system by challenging the belief that the existing order was natural, inevitable, or divinely ordained. Then comes the moment that changes everything, the confrontation in the temple when Jesus overturns the tables of the money changers and expels the sellers. An act often reduced to religious indignation, but in reality a direct attack on the economic machinery that monetized the sacred. By calling the temple a den of robbers, he was not condemning money itself, but the transformation of faith into an exploitative mechanism, and in that moment he ceased to be merely an inconvenient preacher and became a real political threat by striking the balance point between religious authority and imperial power. The Roman Empire was pragmatic. It tolerated religions and prophets as long as stability and wealth extraction were not threatened. And the problem was not what Jesus said spiritually, but the tangible effect his message had on a population already close to collapse. Temple authorities quickly understood the danger, especially during religious festivals when Jerusalem became a powder keg filled with indebted, angry, and desperate people, and any talk of liberation or justice could ignite uncontrollable unrest. The decision to eliminate him was not only theological, but economic and political, an attempt to preserve a system already cracking, and his death did not end the conflict but exposed the fragility of an order built on exploitation. Decades later, tension exploded into the Great Jewish Revolt, culminating in the destruction of the Temple in 70 AD, when Rome crushed Jerusalem, looted its treasures, and eliminated the priestly elite, winning militarily, but losing something more subtle: control over the narrative. Because the ideas survived, spreading through small communities operating on different principles, sharing resources, supporting one another, relieving internal debts, creating parallel systems without temples, armies, or treasuries, systems far harder to destroy. Rome knew how to crush armed rebellions, but ideas that eroded moral legitimacy required a different response, and centuries later, Rome itself would absorb parts of this moral framework, a silent admission that force alone cannot sustain an empire forever. The lesson is clear: economic systems do not collapse only because they are unjust. They collapse when the stories that justify them stop convincing people, and first-century Judea was a warning that still echoes today. Do we truly understand the economic roots of the great narratives that shaped our worldview, or do we still accept simplified versions that hide power, money, and control? If this perspective changed how you see history, the present, and the structures around you, then this is only the beginning. Subscribe to the channel because here we do not tell comfortable stories, we dismantle the hidden mechanisms behind them, revealing how empires rise, how systems exploit, and how simple ideas can threaten massive structures. History hides secrets, and those who understand the past see the present with far greater clarity.